The circle of life is that of lies, where the Lion King movie shows a world that follows no concept of ecology or logic and should be a hell. Really, this movie, in its attempt to show us the mattered world of decay under Star, showed a realistic version of what the Pride Lands should look like. For the disease that would plague it to the absence of herbivores, this savanna wouldn't survive a year without collapse. This is a video on the ecosystem and ecology of the Lion King, from the animals that live in the Pride Lands and how they would actually interact, to the environment itself and why the land dying makes no scientific sense, to the much darker reality of what would happen if this savanna existed in the real world. Let me explain. See, this film, and well, technically its sequel films, set up an ecosystem that is very weird, and the best way to really show that is to go over the basic concepts of the Pride Lands, both before and after Star. This is a small, seemingly isolated savanna kingdom with one lion royal family, basically just 3 hyenas that live in the outskirts, a few named animals, and some seen in open shots, but still a very small amount. And then, after Star, a land literally completely dead with 0 rain, and skeletons everywhere as everyone is suffering. Now, thankfully, this land is completely okay and healed after a day with Simba returning, because obviously that's science. Now, the core thing we should introduce here as a central ecological rule to go by throughout this video is the energy pyramid, the real version of this movie's fake circle of life. See, all life goes from plants to herbivores to predators, with 10% of the energy moving up each level. With this, I wanted to do a little look at each major animal shown in this film and how they contribute to the overlying problem the Pride Lands has. See, the biggest issue here is our title card animal being the lions and how they make no sense, because this movie shows very few lions, being 1 king, 1 queen, and a few bonus lions and 2 cubs, one even being from the royal family. These lions also completely roll over the animals of the Pride Lands, and when Star takes over, the lands magically respond by literally having no more rain, and the savanna just falls apart. Now, real life prides of lions usually are in higher numbers than shown, and should be more like 10 to 15 lions than the under 6 we see. We would also need 7 to 9 kilograms of meat per day, or 15.5 to 20 pounds. Then the bitter deal here is that 80% of cubs die before adulthood, and lions usually give birth to 1 to 4 cubs in the first place. This all brings us to a big problem. The Pride Lands have 3 to 5 lions, with one of them being missing and the other dead. Halfway in the movie is not viable, also not really making sense with lion culture, if you can call it that. The lioness could also easily kill Scar, and even if they didn't, you'd think they would make more cubs to replace Simba, but no, for some reason. Also, the chance that Noah survives to adulthood in this horrible environment with the already bad survival rates of cubs is very low. Finally, lions aren't kings and don't rule over other animals, instead having territories to hunt. But hey, that's all pretty generic obvious stuff. Obviously, lions don't really act as the royal family, but the more interesting problem is actually hyenas and how this movie paints them as these little annoying guys in the corner, when really they're the biggest hunters compared to lions. See, in this movie, we see basically 3 goofy scavenger hyenas, all serving Scar the lion with the promise of all the antelope they can eat. This does not make sense. In reality, hyenas live in large packs at low numbers at 15, but going up to 80, not 3. Also, contrary to popular belief, this movie wants you to think, hyenas hunt 95% of their food, and most lions actually steal from them. But this movie for some reason paints them as these evil creatures that steal all the food from the innocent lions, and for that reason they have to be starved, obviously. And for that reason, they have to be starved. It's the circle of life. It also just doesn't make sense for these hyenas to follow Scar, a lion, or for them to hunt zebras, as the whole reason they can hunt big animals is because they act in large packs. Finally, touching on the general herbivores we see, like zebras and antelope, they are for some reason just celebrating lions, and after Scar are all dead because obviously, but in the real world, they are very central, and savannas depend heavily on huge herbivore biomass, with thousands of grazing animals required, when in this movie we just don't see that. They also would not just stay and die under Scar, but leave his territory. Now, with all this, let's move forward from the animals to the environment itself and how this ecosystem is literal hell and makes no sense. Let me explain. But before I do that, how about you do something for me? It's very simple, I promise. Simply push that subscribe button if you like that, maybe turn on notifications. But really, it would be very nice of you. I've I've undermined the idea in the past and felt it silly, but apparently asking people to subscribe actually works. So if you like the video and getting more videos since I'm trying to do the insane task of 3 videos a week, it would be great if you subscribed and just watched. Either way, back to the video. A core issue with this ecosystem is what animals are allowed in it and what are not. We have other predators like cheetahs and snakes, but we are allowed hyenas, leopards, jackals, crocodiles, and just a bunch of other predators. Removing these animals is a very big deal. See, predators don't just eat animals, they are central to dividing the ecosystem up between each other and keeping it alive. I go over this in my video on the horrible how to train your dragon ecosystem, but basically they split up prey by size, location, time of day, and really hunting methods, so they don't wipe each other's food source out and can specialize on a few animals. And during this, they end up accomplishing some major jobs that if removed would ruin this entire ecosystem. Let's start with leopards. Leopards are the tree predators. They hunt medium animals like monkeys, small antelope, and young warthogs. They hunt mostly at night as well, dragging their kills in a tree so other predators can't steal them. That last part is extremely important because it spreads food throughout the ecosystem instead of letting everything pile up on the ground for lions and hyenas. Without leopards, medium herbivores explode in population. More babies survive, which means more animals reach adulthood, and suddenly lions are forced to hunt smaller prey than they normally would, which means more pressure on gazelles and zebras and anything else in that size range. Because when you put more stress on a group of prey, they hide, stop reproducing, and make more failed hunts for the stressed predators till everything falls apart. Now let's talk about cheetahs, an animal that is allowed, but it feels like in the real world effects aren't taking place. See, cheetahs hunt small, fast antelope during the day, and what makes cheetahs insanely important is that they target the weak, sick, and slow. Well sad, that is quality control for the prey population, and removes animals spreading disease and carrying bad genetics. Without cheetahs, sick animals live longer, which also means weak genetics build up in the population, and eventually you get a huge, unhealthy herbivore population that is way more fragile than it should be. But hey, at least cheetahs are in the movie compared to other animals like the African wild dogs. These guys are honestly one of the most important predators in the entire continent and are just not present. Wild dogs are absurdly successful hunters. They succeed in about 80% of their hunts, which makes them for sure the most efficient large predator in Africa. So they constantly apply pressure to the medium-sized herbivores and keep their population steady year-round. Without wild dogs, prey populations don't stay steady, they'd boom, and in reality, after a little bit of that boom, they crash, as they can't handle this excess overflow of growth as it doesn't follow the laws of ecology. Next up are jackals, which you would think aren't super important, but are actually the sanitation department of the savannah. Jackals eat leftover small animals, scraps, and rotting animals. They basically help remove dead bodies before they can rot and spread disease. So without jackals, carcasses sit longer and parasites increase, which creates a spread of disease, and well, without other hunters, we would of course have an ecosystem with a bunch of dying, diseased animals. Great. Then we get to crocodiles, which may be the most overlooked predator in this entire movie, probably because when you think hot desert savannah, you don't think of a crocodile. But really, the savannah's watering hole needs these guys as they make drinking water dangerous. And while that sounds horrible, it is necessary. Because if water is safe, herbivores would just gather in huge numbers and never leave, which would overgraze the area around the rivers and lakes until the vegetation is completely destroyed. But that is nothing compared to the real problem. Because predators are not just to control prey like I built up, because they also control each other. See, lions kill hyenas, but hyenas kill lion cubs. This makes an equal relationship of violence that balances out the population. Leopards also avoid lions, while the wild dogs avoid everyone. If you remove the competition, specifically hyenas, which this film does, lions become a super predator that would actually ruin the ecosystem. And well, the film kinda shows this, but it acts as if Scar is the reason when really Simba and his entire family are, and they should all fall apart far before Scar took power. This is one of the biggest reasons the circle of life here doesn't work, because the circle is missing most of the animals that makes it a circle in the first place, and completely ignores the energy pyramid that is vital to the ecosystem. Now with this, let's move forward from the animals to the environment itself, and how this ecosystem is literal hell and makes no sense. Let me explain. The Pridelands as an actual environment itself doesn't really work, and that's in both before and after Scar. See, every ecosystem has something called a carrying capacity, or the maximum number of animals the land can actually support. Why? Well, basically things like water availability, rainfall cycles, plant growth, soil health, and migration patterns all shape how many animals will live somewhere, and well, that's pretty simple. But in an environment like the savannah, it becomes more complicated just because of the actual animals that live there, mainly being the predators. Let's take a look at our favorite little triangle, the energy pyramid. Looking at our movie, we see a set of animals that could not function under the 10% rule of our pyramid. With lions everywhere, or well, everywhere in comparison to everyone else. Then we have a bunch of cheetahs, snakes, bird of prey, and a bunch of other predator animals in this film compared to herbivores. This is not following the pyramid, it is basically flipping it upside down, which doesn't work. In a real ecosystem following this flip, the predators would overhunt the herbivores, making their population crash, and in return predators would starve and fight each other. And super quickly, everything would just be a mess. This is a problem before Star, and almost feels like the post-starification of the Pride Lands is a glimpse at what it should really look like, not because of him, but just the ecosystem this movie is trying to sell. But with this all, I want to actually touch the literal scientific issues with this ecosystem, or more the land itself, being what happens when Star takes over and how it just seems to not make any sense. Something that is a running theme in this movie. See, this movie shows the land become barren in the kingship of Star. From a lush savanna to a desert with dead animals, no rain, and basically a biblical hell. This is a great visual and all, and very dramatic, but scientifically, it makes absolutely no sense. This grass does not disappear when predators dominate, especially hyenas. Savanna grass is some of the toughest plant life on Earth. It evolved to survive constant grazing, trampling hooves, seasonal droughts, and wildfires. It's not like suburban green, and you can't kill it so quickly. You would need hundreds of million hungry mouths eating non-stop for years, or you need the soil itself to collapse. And while yes, these films actually letting hyenas eat would do that, it just wouldn't, as hyenas are eating the herbivores, not the grass, and they also would have no effect to the declining output of rain. Now, real desertification requires years of overgrazing, multiple failed raining seasons, erosion removing topsoil, and root systems dying off. Early damage would take years, severe damage would take decades, and full desertification can take generations. Now, this movie takes place over a decade at least, so we do have time, but the problem is this movie proposes that Star's plan would somehow trigger any of these things when they just shouldn't. Removing the stupid policy on hyenas should put the ecosystem more close to ours, not make rain stop. Speaking of that, I want to talk about this strange climate problem. See, well, yes, savannas need rain, it's not just because they require constant rainstorms, but savannas work like other ecosystems functioning in seasons, being a wet season and a dry season that repeats in a cycle for an ecosystem year-round. Now, during these seasons, the savanna doesn't just die, its grass becomes dormant, and roots store water underground. Well, yes, this means Star shouldn't just when taking power made the planet stop raining and enter a permanent dry season. It also means these plants and grasses wouldn't just come back out and be all good after one rainstorm, which makes the biggest miracle in this movie being the ending rainstorm that instantly fixes everything after Simba returns. Very, very stupid. This rainstorm would not restart an ecosystem that's supposedly truly dead without any life. After this weird unnatural severe drought, the plants would take months to regrow, herbivores would take years to recover, predators even longer, and soil nutrients would need multiple seasons to rebuild. Ecosystems growing through drought that happens in this film with actual reasons take decades to fix, so one rainstorm shouldn't do that. But that aside, there is one final point I want to mention. It's honestly one I don't see people talking about. It makes sense, it's kind of weird, and not a part of the circle of life people think about. Disease, rot, decomposition, and parasites. These are all parts of a real savanna, and this film doesn't really understand that, and it may trick you into thinking so, but I promise you, it doesn't. See, predator-heavy ecosystems are disease factories. In reality, we would expect rabies, anthrax, distemper, tuberculosis, ticks, worms, blood parasites, everywhere, with predators eating sick animals and infecting each other until entire populations crash. This is a real problem and danger of these real horrible ecosystems that have lions populations suffering mass die-offs regularly. But in this movie, everything is healthy. The movie's only touch on this is a failed attempt at decomposition, where it actually dead animal bodies are great fertilizer. They're not. But really, the biggest absence of all is scavengers. Real savannas run on death recycling. It's one way to fix all this. Vultures, insects, bacteria, fungi, all breaking down carcasses and returning nutrients to the soil. This is the real circle of life, and in this movie, without scavengers, bodies should just accumulate, and water should become contaminated, spreading disease and having parasites explode. So with that, really, the ecosystem under Star isn't unrealistic, it's just not real. It's an ecosystem that could technically exist because it's dead, and any ecosystem with all these problems I've gone over would be dead, but how it dies under Star is just silly and nonsensical, and it's ignoring that it shouldn't have survived under any lion. Now, with all the stuff we've established, I like to do a little simulation of sorts using all all the problems we have and taking the fictional Breadland under good old Mufasa and see how reality ruins it. Let's start with our starting conditions. The Breadlands is a small, semi-isolated savanna ecosystem with extremely low herbivore biomass, a surprisingly dense predator population, but missing very important animals, with almost no visible scavengers, and currently, in its fictional logic, no disease. So in other words, it's doomed. Now the first few months are actually pretty uneventful. Nothing dramatic is happening because all the bad stuff is really silent in the beginning and in the background, not right in your face. Predators begin to experience prey scarcity stress as lions, hyenas, cheetahs, birds of prey, and snakes are all hunting in the same territory, while the herbivore biomass simply is not high enough to support them. So hunting success drops, missing hunts become more common, and meals become way less frequent. This does not immediately kill all predators, but it does do something far more important. It stops reproduction. In both predators and prey, like lionesses, litters will become smaller, as animals begin to reproduce less under the new stresses, and cub survival rates drop. Now jumping way ahead, within the first year, predator starvation begins to heavily show. Competition intensifies as lions steal from hyenas way more than they already do, hyenas steal from lions, and smaller predators like cheetahs lose kills constantly. Cub mortality, which is already extremely high in real ecosystems, rises to catastrophic levels, and really, the true decline of predators has begun. At first, this sounds like good news for herbivores, but this is where the Breadlands reveals another problem. There was never enough herbivores to begin with. Small herbivores populations are fragile and depend heavily on migration, genetic diversity, and massive breeding pools. So in a magical world where the numbers are super small, inbreeding would begin quickly, parasites spread more efficiently, bird defects increase, and population growth slows instead of accelerating. This is what happens when you put a limited amount of herbivores in a savanna without the necessary traits to survive. By the second year, carcasses begin accumulating, dead predators and dead herbivores littered across the land. In a real savanna, this would trigger just a bunch of scavengers, but the Breadlands barely shows one. So without vultures and a proper decomposition system, carcasses linger and ruin water sources. Anthrax spores spread through soil, rabies spread through the desperate predators, parasites thrive in stagnant water, and disease finally enters this ecosystem. And once disease enters a predator-heavy system, it spreads rapidly because predators interact with multiple species and frequently fight or scavenge. This means disease will become the force that accelerates everything to hell quicker than starvation. And after a few years, really, the ecosystem is dead. Worse than Scar's hell, now a world overrun with spores of death and eldritch in its horror. This is a place that would not bear life for decades, God forbid a single storm. There is no saving this place, for it has become the land of pride, and in that is hell on earth where nothing can survive.